we're going to get started. Thank you for coming to this press conference. This is a situation that has been long overdue. Michigan's Child Care Protective Services has been failing children and families, and the results have been having very tragic consequences. This week in Lincoln Park, 5-year-old Ethan Belcher had his life taken from him. His mother and stepfather were charged with his murder. Ethan's extended family members had been in contact with CPS over the course of several years with concerns about physical abuse. Detroit's Channel 4 newscaster attempted to investigate CPS's actions with the family using the Freedom of Information Act, but were denied that by MDHHS officials because, quote, CPS cases and information are not available by FOIA and are exempt from FOIA. This news was even surprising to our governor, who told the reporters that you're educating me right now. I think perhaps there's an opportunity for us to take a hard look at it and see what more we can do. Well, today is the day for us to do that. Earlier this month, I inquired whether CPS had previous contact with an Oakland County mother who was found frozen to death in a field with her 2 sons. I was told MDHHS information was extremely limited to the point of absolutely zero information and what it can share with the legislator regarding Child Protective Services cases, including whether or not the department even had contact with a particular family. Strict privacy laws are necessary and rightly protected when it comes to these personal situations, but there must also be room for investigation and oversight in order to prevent tragedies and to provide justice when it is needed. These recent events have shined a spotlight on CPS, and what we are seeing is nothing short of a disaster. CPS cannot continue to operate in the dark, shielded from oversight by an antiquated law. This agent cannot be allowed to operate in total secrecy when there are so many innocent lives at risk. What's more and what else can be done in the future to provide more transparency is a law like this that will give the media and sitting legislators information on these cases. So thank you for coming, and I want to give Ethan's aunts an opportunity to give you a little bit of the background of what they have went through. It's been a very emotional thing. They had to identify Ethan's body, so I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
You just want to start by saying thank you guys for everybody to actually be listening and to be passing this, or to be putting this even to be an option.
Thank you guys for getting his story out there. I feel like the system needs to change. We need to all work together to save babies everywhere. Something has to change. We need to change this law, pass this bill so we can save more babies. I am so devastated we had to lose poor baby Ethan for this to have to happen. But something has to change. Something has to change today, not tomorrow. Today. Tomorrow, a baby might lose his life. It's not worth the wait.
Unfortunately, because it's not only been Ethan.
There's more stories like this where children are in these homes and nobody's answering for this. Nobody's answering for these babies losing their lives and being abused and tortured every day of their poor little lives. So thank you guys for helping us take a stand. And I hope with everything in me this bill passes so we can save children everywhere.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Did anyone have any questions you wanted to ask?
Actually, talk a little bit about your contact with CPS and did not do to enable you to help.
We tried so hard. I tried so hard to get the boys in my custody, but with the laws being the way they are, and me just being the paternal aunt and not having any custody or anything, there was nothing I could do. We were told we were just the aunts. There was nothing we could do unless our brother signed over his rights. And so when I turned him in the first time, the children weren't even taken away, and poor Ethan was almost starved. And then the second time, I took him to the hospital. I had pictures. The police were involved, and ultimately, all they had to do was take some classes, and the children were sent back to that house of terror. And it should never happen so quickly, so easily, when things like this are brought to their attention.
Ashley, can you talk about the child that Ethan was? Can you talk about the child that Ethan was and the emotions you feel knowing CPS failed to keep him safe?
He's so happy. He'd love to be loved. Love to go to the park. Love to be with his brothers.
To be
His brothers trauma.
to go what he went through, he still had spirit,
A good
and that's why
spirit.
we're here.
He was a sweet, sweet little boy. He loved to be loved. Anytime you hugged him, he just loved to be hugged and loved. He didn't understand, I think, what real love was.
One other thing, to this day, have you received any answers from CPS
No,
as to where things failed
no,
for Ethan?
no, sir.
What is your thought about CPS and the way they operate?
My thought is they need to take things more seriously with every single case. I feel like the workers should only have the case on their desk for no more than 2 weeks, and it should be mandated that they have it solved within 2 weeks of getting that case. I mean, or less. If there's abuse, it should be mandated for them to solve and get the children out of the situation immediately.
How much does it bother you that there is no way for anybody outside of your agency to be able to check and see what they do, how they do, whether they do?
It bothers me a lot. It bothers me a lot that things are they're swept under the rug and they're kept hush hush. They don't want people to know the things that are just let go and let go and let go. And these children are sent back to these homes, and ultimately they lose their lives at the hands of these monsters that are just not even, and they're not checking on the babies like they should be. I mean, things need to change within the system. Some serious changes need to be made within the system.
Ashley, what did happen to the caseworkers? Who were
The caseworkers on the cases of anything where a child loses his life, loses any life, the caseworkers should be terminated immediately. I mean, they should not have their jobs. There's no way that
Somebody could go back.
they should get away with letting these babies lose their lives either. They should be held responsible just as well.
Ashley, was Ethan ever reluctant to go home when he was with you?
Absolutely, but there was nothing I could do. He didn't want to leave my house when he was there. He loved being there because they were fed, clothed, went to the park to play all the time. They had my son to play with. It's just sad.
What was the condition of that house, actually?
It
Horrendous.
looked like an abandoned house. It's the only way I can describe it. It was basically an abandoned house that they took over and moved them babies in there, and they had to live in that nightmare.
Did you ever get inside that house to see?
I've never been inside that house, no, sir. But if I had ever been in that house, then babies would have never, ever been there. They would have never stayed there. I would have went to jail for kidnapping charges because I would have kidnapped them. I mean, you almost have to save a child. You almost have to go to jail for kidnapping in order for something to be done. I mean, I might be the one in jail, but at least I could have saved them.
Candace, what are your thoughts?
That's what I was thinking, because I'm from Tennessee, and I would take him, and the caseworker literally wasn't working with me at all because I'm just an aunt, and especially I'm in another state. And why shouldn't that be an option? And, like, I'm willing to help this child to stay alive, to be out of a situation to where he can have a life. He can go to a theme park. He can do whatever he wants. But now, he don't have that option.
Senator, where do you go from here now that the bill has been introduced? Can you talk about the process and also the frustration you've experienced, because people outside of Lansing might have the misconception that you could call CPS and get some answers, but you can't.
Well, as you could see, even the governor herself was surprised that you can't get information, the media can't get information, the legislature can't get information. And I have been dealing with this for many, many years. My wife and I were foster care parents. So all the way back to that time when we were seeing some of the issues, I would call legislators long before I was in the legislature and say, I'm getting told about these cases. What can you tell me? They said, no, nobody can get any information. So this has been an ongoing problem. There's been, in the last 2 weeks, or last 2 days, I probably talked to 18 or so reporters. Almost every one of them have told me a horror story. Some just heard this morning around the state, these same things. This has been going on for decade after decade. And if we're going to have any change in how things are done, we have to have transparency. This bill would say that someone like me can go in and look at the entire case. Now, right now, I wouldn't be able to say anything about the case, but I'd be in front of the caseworkers, the supervisors. I'd say, what in the hell's going on here? When it gets into committee, assuming it does, it's a good question. Is it going to go to committee, or is it going to go to a death committee where it dies? Is it going to go to committee where it's going to get a committee hearing? If it passes there, is it going to go to the floor, and so on, all the way to the governor's desk? To get a bill like this through, there's going to be resistance. There is just going to be. Even if we put in provisions that are very reasonable to make sure that we ensure the privacy of individuals, it's still going to be a long slog. But I really am so proud of these ladies here that drove all the way in, came from another state, went through the emotion. That they were telling me about seeing the body. To make a difference for other people, for other people's kids. So hopefully we can make a difference today.
Senator, the last report done by the Auditor General 5 years ago said that the department was largely a mess then. And you have seen that report, discussed that report, and you say all it is really is just raw numbers. It doesn't get to the heart of the real matter of what's going on in CPS. What in your estimation is going on and what needs to be fixed, as best you can tell?
The raw numbers can tell you something in terms of, well, are the numbers increasing, decreasing, that kind of thing, in terms of a number of cases and how they were handled and adjudicated. But what it doesn't tell you is a case like this, and there's a lot of them, that it sounds to me, from everything I've heard, is a complete failure from CPS's side. Was it the caseworkers? Was it the supervisors? Was it the whole system? Is there systemic problems that aren't even rising to this level because the child didn't die, but they're living in hell now? We don't know. We can't get any information. So hopefully this is going to be the day that things are going to change. And the governor herself said we need to look into fixing this. So hopefully we can get that done with this law today.
Senator, are you aware that there already is a law that allows the MDHS director to release CPS information if they deem that several factors are?
Well, I could just imagine if across the state and country, if police departments were able to say, if we deem that this is of public use, you can't find out a single detail of the case unless we deem it's of public use. It's the same thing there. No, that doesn't give me any consequence. CPS is like any other bureaucracy. It wants to cover its rear end, and so that does not make me feel sanguine that this is the solution. We have to be able to get in there and look at these cases. And I'd be more than happy to put in language that, which I believe is current language, that it's a misdemeanor if you disclose that information. But it will give the legislature and the media an opportunity to go in and take a look at these cases. That alone, I think, will clean this up. I don't think that they're going to want to lay out the whole details of the case, like what happened here, and justify it to the media or justify it to the legislature.
Senator, how can you concretely say what you're proposing to do or change in regard to time frame or release of information, and and also when we balance what has happened here with privacy of families, let alone obviously the protection of children? I get it, but yet the privacy issue is a huge one, as you've referenced already. I'd like to know what you're specifically asking to be done.
Well, if you look at the current law, it has a whole bunch of exemptions on who does get access. Doctors and psychologists and all these healthcare professionals can get access to the complete case. Currently, they're exempt from these restrictions. The bill just is very simple. It adds in the credentialed media and a sitting member of the legislature as an exempted individual. I was just looking at the law today briefly, but it looks like, from what I could tell, if that doctor, healthcare professional releases that information, it's a misdemeanor. So that would still apply to the media or to a sitting legislator. So there is protections there. Now, whether that needs to have some loosening, that's the part committee process plays. So we put in, these are just the exemptions to the current exemptions, adding 2 more. Now, people may say that's not good enough because there's going to be maybe a whole lot wrong, like in this case, that needs to be disclosed. I personally think that if CPS knows that the legislature and the media have the ability to get information, that's going to go a long way towards them saying, we don't want to have this ever repeated again, because now it's not going to be able to be buried internally. They're going to be able to get the information. If committees feel that it needs to have some looser restrictions, that's something we would be willing to take a look at if that were the will of the committee.
But on the other side of the coin, if you will, anybody involved with Child Protective Services moving forward, if this passes, would be their information would be open to the public, to the press, every case, any instance with CPS? You have to be, you can't just say I'm the press, I'm a person. You have to be the credentialed press. You have to be a sitting member of the legislature. I don't think that they're going to want to get charged with a misdemeanor by disclosing that information. If they were, a doctor could be the same thing, a psychologist, all these other exempted individuals could do the same thing. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I just don't think that that's a huge risk, that someone like me is going to read the file and start opening that up to the public. The question becomes, do we want it left at that level so that they can only look at it and discuss it with the department and nothing further, or give them some latitude? That would be something that we've discussed in committee.
I have a question for Candace or Ashley. Can you give us any updates on Ethan's younger brother, how he's doing?
I know he's doing pretty good. He had some pretty severe injuries, but he is doing really good from what I've heard. I think he's in foster care right now, but he will be, I'm pretty sure, going to a family member. They're exploring other family members to place him. Shane, baby Shane.
Senator, I guess I'm confused about what it is that allows CPS to avoid oversight on a level that can go on the case level. In other words, there's the ombudsman, there is the auditor general, but somewhere, somehow, this need for secrecy prevents this agency from actual oversight, where you get to see what happened and whether its people are performing. How did that happen?
My guess, potentially, it could have been well intended when the law was written years ago, to make sure with sensitive things relating to kids that you certainly don't want things just gushed out into the public. But I think it was poorly written, that the only, outside of a healthcare professional, the only entity that can get access to the information currently under the law is a committee that oversees the department. So it has to be a committee that oversees DHHS. A lot of the problems you have, if you're not aware of politics, is if you are a committee chair and you're of the same party as the governor, well, are you going to rip open that can of worms and get the dirty laundry out and make the governor look bad? Well, maybe that's not such a good idea. Maybe we don't need to take a look at this case. That's the kind of thing I think has been going on for many, many decades. So this would give an opportunity for any sitting legislator to be able to look at this information. Again, they're going to be in big trouble if they disclose anything, but it gives them an opportunity to sit down with those caseworkers, the supervisor, the head of the department, and say, what in the hell is going on with this case? And there is so many cases that many of you have brought up to me in the last few days, and many more reporters. It just seems like it's pandemic across the state of Michigan, how many cases there are like this, and these are just the ones that hit the media. How many have not hit the media? So it's rife with secrecy, and whenever you have that in a government entity, I don't care who it is. I've been a proponent of Freedom of Information Open Meetings Act for the state legislature for the governor, so it's not something new for me. I think whenever you have that secrecy, there's a problem. And the solution to this is to bust this open and give the media and sitting legislators an opportunity to look at these cases again without currently written giving any information out to the public on these.
Has anyone provided the family or you with a cause of death in this case? Exact cause of death, not like through autopsy or anything like that?
I would have to. Blunt force trauma.
Senator, can you talk about from what you've been able to see or hear anecdotally about staffing issues perhaps, or beyond the transparency element we're talking about? The CPS dramatically understaffed. I have no idea about caseloads, any light you can shed in regard to how the agency's functioning and if it needs to be revamped and people added to it?
I've heard anecdotally from caseworkers that they are understaffed. That particularly in some areas that are high crime areas, that they are told you have to park your car in a certain place and don't drive a car that can be identified as a state car and all of these things, that they feel they need more protection in some of these instances. That's a concern I've heard. As to caseload, this is something that if the department says, Senator, the real problem here is lack of pay of caseworkers or a bigger budget. We're sitting, $7 billion? $7 billion, and we spend money on gushing money all over on every kind of a project that if the public looked at it would go, what in the hell kind of spending are you doing? When we have an issue like this is public safety. It's the number one job of government is protecting the people, particularly little kids like this. That's the number one job. And we have billions sitting here. Why on earth would there be a shortage of money to take care of this problem? So if that's the problem, let's solve the problem. But again, we need committee hearings. I've never seen committee hearings on this, although decade after decade, a reporter after reporter brings story after story and nothing gets done.
Senator, if you could talk to some of the early conversations you've had with other lawmakers about this, particularly with the Education Committee, for example, or any other committee where this bill might go, how those conversations going?
What I've experienced, frankly, for many, many years, even before I was in the legislature, like I said, we were, my wife and I were in foster care. You deal with a lot of these cases when you go through foster care training. And so I would talk to my legislator way back then, this is 25 years ago, and bring cases up. I remember there was a case of these two 5-year-old girls who were raped repeatedly and returned back to the home. I said, what in the hell's going on? I called my legislator. And they said, Jim, you can't get any information. And then I was hearing that all along the way, you can't get information. And frankly, I just accepted it. Like, well, you can't get any information. Even when I've been in the legislature for 8 years, and I always heard you can't get any information. It was the case about a week and a half ago in Pontiac with the mother with 3 children. She had mental health issues. The kids were wrapped in sheets. It was freezing cold. She bedded them down in a field, and they froze to death. The 12-year-old scampered off to a house and survived. But I can tell you with a 12-year-old and younger, there had to be interactions. This mother was completely out of the universe, out of her mind. That doesn't happen overnight. So I called CPS. because I had heard there was interactions with CPS. That was when I was told, we cannot tell you anything, which I've heard 100 times from, not only from me, from others. So I said, well, why can't you? State and federal law. I said, can you send those to me? So they did, and I read the federal law, and it says basically you just can't release sensitive information that use the address as an example. What is the state law? The state law, you have these other exempted individuals, but the legislature is only the committee that oversees that department. So if that committee chair, for whatever reasons, is not interested, that's the end of the story. Someone like me, someone like you cannot get the information. I thought, this is crazy. This is the bottleneck right here. This is the bottleneck. So that's what was the driving force. And then right on the heels, I heard about this horrible story. And like I said, if we don't solve it, we'll hear about another one next week, another one next week. It just never seems to end.
Do you know when the last time was that CPS came out to the home or had a face-to-face visit to see the child?
No, I do not. I do not know when the last time was. I do know that the maternal grandmother had them while they were in temporary custody when I turned her in February of 2021. So the maternal grandmother had them, and ultimately they just went back to the house.
Do you know when the family came from Lincoln Park to Detroit, or when that happened?
I'm not sure of any exact timing on that. I live in Downriver.
And we're going to have to wrap up for the senator to get to session, but I want to thank everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, guys.